Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm here to help you make the most of your mineral rights and royalties. And I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams. Justin, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Matt. Tired. We're in the process of moving our business, and boy, is it a task.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I know it's hard enough to move. When you move a house, I can imagine moving a business is just that much harder. So good luck. I hope it's over soon and it goes smoothly. I imagine you're looking forward to being in the new space, though.
We definitely are. Absolutely. And Matt, we've got some interesting news for mineral rights here, and it's kind of all over the place. So an interesting group of stories.
Yeah, we have a really wide variety of stories that we're going to cover in mineral rights news for September of 2023. Hard to believe we're already into September. This year is winding down. It seems like it just got started.
It's been insane. And the pace has just been so fast. And I think everybody seems to feel that way, or many people feel that way. But yeah, we're getting so close to the end of the year. I can't believe it.
Yeah, it seems like it goes faster and faster each year as I get older. But as we're going to talk about here, minerals and royalties is not immune from family squabbles. And so this first article that we're going to cover, Justin, talks about this family feud here.
You know, Matt, the title of the article here is Squabbling Siblings Strike a Deal on Laredo Area Ranches. And Matt, the story is just basically a group of family members who inherited this land through an estate. And it sounds like it caused a lot of contention on how they wanted to handle it, how exactly it was going to be split up, and just all of the fine details.
Exactly. They own like 1,300 acres, including the mineral rights. The value of both the surface and the minerals said to be worth around $70 million, according to this article. And the particular feud seems to stem from an issue with one of the siblings who is the president and director of a family partnership that owns the ranch land and the minerals. And so they felt like he was unilaterally selling the minerals and the ranches without their consent. He was self-dealing, that they had a side deal going on with that transaction. So this had to go to court. And it's a shame that when stuff like this gets aired in public.
You nailed it, Matt. And, you know, we talk about estate planning so often. And this is one of those where if there was information that this might have been a problem, or there was going to be issues with this, or maybe it was his wishes for him to manage it, maybe it wasn't, that all could have been addressed in that estate plan prior to the death. But again, we just don't always have the foresight that we don't have.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the parents presumably had the interest before the siblings inherited it. And if they foresaw any sort of future conflict, you know, they could have structured the deal differently, perhaps putting it in a trust or something like that, and having a third-party trustee. Again, this shouldn't be construed as legal or tax advice, but you know, there are obviously different ways to structure things if you feel like your heirs may not be getting along, especially if there's a lot of money at stake, and that seems to amplify these types of conflicts.
Yep, absolutely. And for people that are, you know, not used to managing this kind of property, it can be really confusing and conflicting what the right options are. And again, you know, that could have been helped out or had somebody else involved that has the best interest of everybody and fiduciary responsibility. I think that's a key when you're talking about large estates.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think too, if it had been structured such that maybe they had to get a third party evaluation or appraisal before selling, and that just sort of eliminate any sort of perception of wrongdoing. And so it would eliminate the president of that family partnership from having to say, hey, trust me, I'm doing what's right. And then they say, well, no, I think it's worth more. You know, I feel like we should be getting more. You could just point to that independent valuation that said, this is what this appraiser said the surface rights are worth. And we had somebody run the numbers on the minerals, and this is what they're worth. And so then it takes you out of it. So I think there's certainly things that could have been done to address those concerns, but it's there. I imagine there was more to it than what's at face value here in this article. I imagine there was some discontent between siblings before this situation even came to be. But I think it just highlights, like you said, Justin, the need to really think ahead about when we figure who's going to inherit these eventually, how do we want it to structure it, both from a tax perspective as well as just making sure everybody gets along when they are managing this, and doing it in such a way that you're not going to be causing potential conflict in the future.
You nailed it, Matt. And we've also talked about the importance of not subdividing those interests if it's possible. You have more power when it's left as one whole. And that's something to kind of think about as well. And on the flip side, I think this is a testament to our court system and what they can work through step by step. But at the end of the day, everybody lost more than they really had to, because this is a long, drawn out process, and it's emotionally and exhausting for everybody, especially when it's tied to family.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that brings us to the next article here, which talks about a federal court order that impacts case law on royalties. And this happens to be in Texas as well. But the key points of this article is that a federal judge in San Antonio ordered dismissal of an oil and gas royalty fees case involving an overpayment. The defendant, an Denver-based oil and gas operator, was freed from a $608,000 claim. And the outcome of this case provides guidance on disputes involving recovery of overpayments when you have a mineral interest owner that transfers or sells their interest to another party. So this was an interesting case, Justin, because the original owners transferred the ownership into an entity that they controlled, and there was an overpayment that occurred. And they claimed, well, you can't reclaim that from us. We don't own it anymore. And Oventive, who happened to be the operator in this case, said, no, actually, we need to get that money back because we paid you too much. And I guess the gist of this is, don't think that you can use and transfer to an entity that you control to, extinguish any overpayment liability.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And, I think the courts ruled time and time again that, liability is going to transfer if the people are the same, no matter the way that it works out through the entity. And this is the case of that. I thought it was interesting that the title of this article, or the statement of this article, of that the operator was freed from a $608,000 claim, it makes you really take a deeper look. And when you dive into it, it really looks like the owners of this were trying to escape this liability. And it looks like they may have known what they're doing. And that's the case. Though that article really kind of makes the operator look bad when you say they were freed of this $608,000 claim.
Yeah, exactly. And, you wonder if they knew about that in doing so. But either way, I think the other thing that it highlights is, if you're in the process of investing in minerals, you want to get a good understanding of, are there any overpayments that are associated with that? Because you could end up inheriting that particular liability if you purchase those assets. So think about this exact situation. If these owners had sold the interest to a third party and had this overpayment situation occurred, then in the case of that kind of following the interest, they're going to start taking those prior period adjustments, and they're going to make everybody whole. And so if they overpaid party A sells to party B, well, party B may be surprised that they're going to get prior period adjustments that are negative. Basically, the royalties will get held in suspense and will accrue until their liability has been paid off. And so that's something else I think that potentially could be an outcome of this. Again, just reading the article at face value, I could be wrong there, but something to think about when you look at the concept of prior period adjustments. It can be from a volume point of view, and how much they got paid by the gas plant and truing up each of the royalty owners, but then also it can be based on the decimal interest. And so if you had too high of a decimal interest and it should have been lower, well, there's a chance that you're going to get that subtracted from future royalty payments until that overpayment is eliminated. And so that's something to keep in mind, I think, for all mineral and royalty owners. Even if you're not selling an interest, if you find out that maybe, you're in a trust situation. I know you ran into this, Justin, where, everybody thought the trust had X. It turned out the trust had Y, which was a little bit smaller. And then there has to be a reconciliation at some point.
Yeah, you nailed it, man. We were very lucky that it was before anything was put into pay status, but you're exactly right. That it's not uncommon for that to happen. Even overriding interest sometimes can get missed and then need to be backed out of it. I've had that happen as well. So always kind of an interesting situation, and can depend a lot on what the operator seeks to do, depending on how much money it was and what they end up wanting to do. it's not something we hear about a lot, which is kind of interesting with operators kind of taking legal action to reclaim funds from mineral right owners. And maybe it happens more than you hear, but I don't hear it a lot.
Yeah, you don't really hear about it. And I think it's a situation where most of the time it's just settled through the royalty checks. And, that ends up being the way that it's dealt with. But certainly this stuff can go to court, like this particular situation. And, again, if companies make mistakes. They have, overpayment is not common, but it happens. And so there needs to be a mechanism for dealing with that. And that's through, again, those prior period adjustments. And so definitely something to be aware of, just so you can kind of realize, if that should happen and what the likely outcome is going to be. Certainly, if you're in a situation where you're dealing with something like this, definitely helps to get guidance from a qualified attorney who's licensed in the state where the minerals are located. They can help make sure that your rights are protected, and especially if there's a lot of money at stake.
You nailed them out. Our next one here is about the EV transition. So electric cars, the popularity is really going up, and the material, like we've talked about with lithium, it's a race to be able to secure those materials and to be able to get them at a price that makes sense for the growth of the EV market. And the latest one, Matt, that they're talking about is graphite, which we were talking before the show. It's a little bit surprising. I know you don't really think graphite when you think EV.
Yeah, I really hadn't thought of that. With lithium, we talked about that in a lot more detail as it relates to minerals and royalties and, benefiting from the production of lithium from produced water. And that was in episode 208. So definitely check that out to stay on top of that particular issue, which is becoming more and more common. Now, we were aware of lithium mining. And to your point, Justin, I really had no idea that the graphite was the other main component of an EV battery, and especially with lithium ion battery. And according to this article, lithium ion battery can contain 15 times more graphite than lithium, and it makes up about 25% of the battery's total volume. And, like Elon Musk has said, they should effectively be called nickel graphite batteries because that's the main components of these particular types of batteries. Now, when you think about the materials that go into these batteries, the electric car sales is growing exponentially. We're going to need more and more, we know, lithium, cobalt, all these types of materials. And it turns out graphite is also one of those minerals that we have an issue with finding domestically and processing it domestically, which is, I guess, no surprise.
Yeah, no surprise, Matt. And it sounds like, we're making moves towards trying to fix that. And the article here talks about the graphics group building a 15,000 tons per annum graphite refining facility in the heart of America's auto industry, Detroit. And that obviously will make a huge impact, Matt, but the refining is just one part of that puzzle. We also have to be able to secure those minerals. And it sounds like there has been some work with graphics on some different places where they can source that. But it'll be interesting to see if the sourcing can keep up with the demand and how much of that is truly domestic.
Yeah, that's a key point, I think. And, reducing our dependence on China for these raw materials and for refined graphite. If we think about wanting to become energy independent, we can do that through domestic oil and gas production, which we've largely become energy independent from that standpoint. But as we electrify more and more things, whether it's cars, trucks, things like that, we become dependent on the countries that develop the materials that go into those finished products. And China tends to be the leader in those raw materials. And so we need to stand up a domestic supply chain of, whether it's lithium, graphite, and all these things, if we're going to continue down this path. Not saying whether it's the right or wrong direction that we're headed, but it is reality. And if we continue down this path, we're going to need more and more of these materials. And, we should be working to secure domestically sourced raw materials. That's through mining of these, in the United States, or at least in North America. And then certainly, like you mentioned, Justin, having the refining capabilities here in the U.S. would be an additional way to secure that and prevent that potential issue if we get into a trade war again with China. If they cut off our graphite supply, then we're up a creek if we are highly dependent on that.
You said, man, there's a paragraph here in this article that says, despite the fact that North American battery factories represent some 1 million metric tons per year of demand for graphite anode material, there's no commercial production in North America currently. And that's just mind boggling. So it's great to see that we're working towards this. And the article mentions some of the sources that they've explored, and they're not all domestic. However, they are outside of China. So that's good to see. And it'll be interesting to see how this continues to develop.
Yeah. And, certainly we've got a long ways to go, it sounds like. So more to come here. But I think the good thing about these developments are that it is going in the right direction, and hopefully we'll get some support for approving mining facilities, approving these types of refining facilities in North America so that we can become independent as it comes to batteries, because that seems to be the way of the future.
You said it, man.
All right. Well, let's talk about the rig count. So we're continuing to head in the wrong direction, Justin. I think we see continued decrease in the number of land rigs. We're down 8 from at least a week ago, which I think, again, is down even more if we look back a month ago. So we're at 613 land rigs right now as of the end of August, and that's down 8 from a week ago. And, continuing to lay down rigs, it looks like.
You said it, Matt. And, what I thought was interesting was the places where these rigs came down as far as the land rigs or domestic rigs. So we've got 3 in Louisiana, 5 in New Mexico, and then 5 in Texas. And that kind of tells me that they're now starting to change the economics of even the most profitable places where they've been drilling. It'll be interesting to see how operators are dealing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's not surprising that we see 2 fewer rigs in the Haynesville, which I've seen some articles recently that suggest at current gas prices around $2.50 that it is not economic to drill new wells. They're below the break-even price, which I think has got to be above $3. And so that's not a surprise there. I was surprised to see that we laid down 7 rigs in the Permian, which again, it could be just that as we're getting towards the end of the year, companies may are getting kind of close to reaching their capital budgets. And so if they have an option to move a rig to another location, they're tapped out in one asset, they're moving it to somewhere else, or maybe that rig contract is coming up and they've been planning to do this by the end of the year, just from a capital budget standpoint. I think it does also highlight that as we go into 2024, these companies are probably going to be looking at lower capital expenditures for next year, just based on what the current commodity prices are. And so now that they're in their planning stages right now, I expect to see this trend continue at least through the end of the year. And then it'll be interesting to see once we hit 2024 and the new capital budget cycle, where we end up. But again, with the oil prices, they're doing decent. We're near $80 a barrel, which is good. It's just we continue to have downward pressure on gas. We have too much of it here in the United States. And until we get the LNG export capacity and those new facilities up and running in 2025 and onwards, I think we're going to continue to see natural gas hover around that $2.50, $3 range, which is okay for existing wells. But if you're going to go and make a decision to drill a new well, it's really not economic to do that. So I expect to see that companies that need to keep drilling, they're going to do that, but they may not complete those wells for a year or more. They'll become DUCs, or drilled but uncompleted wells, and just waiting for the gas price to recover so the economics are favorable when they do start producing.
You said it, Matt. Something that listening to earning calls over the past few months, and it seems to be a pretty common theme that many companies are seeing revenue go up. However, expenses are also way up, and it's crunching that profit margin. So it'll be really interesting to see if the operators are going to be impacted, and if it changes where they're going to break even on wells, or if we're going to see some reduced pressure in the expense and cost increase with everything that comes with anything in business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a balancing act, and it is, certainly with inflation where it's at, it's not helping things, but hopefully that'll continue to get better, and hopefully gas prices will start to recover next year. And then we'll start to see more drilling in these basins that have a lot of natural gas, particularly Louisiana, also Pennsylvania, Ohio. So more to come. But again, we're still running 632 rigs, so it's not the end of the world. We're definitely well above where we were, during COVID. So I think that's the silver lining out of all of this. And, I think we're still seeing a lot of focus on oil, which is, great right now. And so I think to the extent that oil prices stay where they're at, we'll see continued drilling with probably a focus on oil in 2024 as well.
All right. Well, that covers it, man.
That covers it. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode. And if you find an article that you'd like us to cover in a future news episode, you can send it to feedback@mineralrightspodcast.com. And as always, links to the articles we talked about today can be found in the show notes at mineralrightspodcast.com. Thanks again for listening. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.